Hello and welcome to our 6th lecture on value. So today we need to be taking good notes. We're going to be going over a lot of different vocabulary for dealing with value. So value is a gradation of light across a form. So we're going to have light that's hitting a form and the shadows are gradating around that object. I might use the word achromatic. So achromatic is an image that has no color, just value, so just grays, which is a little bit different from monochromatic, where it has just one color. So we have this Kerouac's print at the bottom where we can see that there's no color, there's just lots and lots of values and reflections going on within that image. So in this class we're going to be dealing with value. We're not going to get much into color. So dealing with value, the value of an object is going to be determined by two different things. So one's going to be the amount and direction of light, and the other one's going to be the object's local color. So let's look into those things. So we have a still life, and we have our light source. You can see I photoshopped this together pretty quickly. But we have our light source, and there's light striking our still life in that direction, and the intensity of our light is going to affect our value. That's pretty obvious. When we're drawing, we're thinking about how that light is going to gradate over different forms, how it's going to create cast shadows. Different types of structures are going to have light gradating differently. So a circle, there might be more of a smooth gradation. We might have harder edges with more cubic forms. So different types of forms are going to have different, gradations of light. So when we're looking in a drawing, when we're looking out at a still life, when we're looking at objects, we're trying to find 6 categories of light. So we have 6 different categories. Our light source is coming, the light hits. Where it hits is a highlight, that's going to be the brightest spot. It's going to gradate down to what we call the light. It's going to get a little darker then and turn into a shadow. Often on kind of more spherical objects, we'll have this core shadow where it gets a little deeper. And then we have reflected light. So reflective light is when we have light that goes, it bounces off the ground, and it usually catches the edge of objects and makes it a little bit brighter. And then we have our cast shadow, so the shadow that's cast on the ground. So we're looking for those 6 different categories of light whenever we're drawing. We're trying to define those. We can work with a value scale. So a value scale is a way of organizing how we use value. I like Ross's 9-step scale, where it starts off with white being at 1. Our kind of middle values, our middle grays are going to be around 5. And then we're going to have black around 9. So it's a way of organizing value. You're going to have to do several value scales for homework with different media. And you can see over here on this diagram, we have our highlight, light, shadow, core shadow, reflected light, and cast shadow again. And you can think about how using these different values, we can use them in this drawing to even kind of like fill in the blanks. That highlight's going to be maybe 1. Our core shadow might be a nice dark 8. So when we're looking out at our still life, we're trying to find those different values. We're trying to find those different categories of light. So the second thing that's going to determine an object's value is its local color. So local color is the natural color of an object that's not yet modified by light and shadow. So I have a still life here. There's bananas and grapes and apples and oranges, all kinds of stuff in it. They all have a different color. So that's going to really impact what the value of that object is going to be. So we can see in this image in color, when we make it black and white, the values do very different things. Sometimes values and colors are going to work quite differently. Different colors have different values, right? So often our warm colors, reds, oranges, yellows, are going to be lighter in value. And our cool colors, violets, greens, blues, are going to be darker in value. So value contrast is also really important. The relationship between different colors, different values. We have two examples of this down at the bottom here. On the right, we have that classic square in the center that's the same gray, but because the outside is darker or lighter, it tricks our brain into thinking that those grays are different. And we have an example over here where we have this gradation, and the gray squares are yet again the same gray, but because of what's surrounding it, makes our eye and brain think it's a different value. So it's kind of tricky trying to figure out the value of an object. You got that local color, you have that gradation of light, there's value contrast. So we're going to be really trying to slow down and look at objects and try to figure out what is that actual value. So there's different techniques for achieving value. We're going to go over these today. So we've already talked a little bit about working with line weight. We're going to get into what's called hatching, cross-hatching, agitated line. We're going to talk about smudging versus shading. And then we'll dive into techniques of additive and a subtractive value. So we've talked about this before, how we can use line weight to show a light source, maybe give a little bit of volume to an image. But if we want to start to show value with line, we're going to do hatching. So hatching is short, parallel lines that are often closer together to show darker values. So you can build them up by having them closer together. If those lines go with the cross contours of an object, they can help show volume. So like in this image, where we have certain sections where the lines are thicker, like maybe in this shadow right here. They're wrapped around, they're showing the cross contours, but they're also showing shadows. So there's a little bit of volume and value. So cross-hatching is when we take those lines and we start to cross them, we build them up, it's hatching crossed. And we can see on the left we have a Robert Crumb drawing, where that value's kind of been built up in certain areas, or this Damier drawing on the right. Here's another example of cross-hatching by Durr. This is a toned paper drawing, so the paper is kind of like a blue-gray, and you can see there's sections where he's hatched in white values or dark values. We'll be getting into doing a toned paper drawing down the road. Next up we have is agitated line. We're not going to deal too much with agitated line, but some artists will, scribble to kind of build up their values. These are two examples of works by Giacometti that are somewhat more gestural, so we can see the figure on the right. Through scribbling, he started to kind of build up those values. So let's talk about smudging. In this class, we're going to be dealing with value with graphite, and a lot of people come in and they're smudging. So for a lot of reasons, we're not going to be smudging in this class. It's a good way to fail a project if we're doing value and you're smudging it out. I mean, a lot of people come in, that's how they draw. It's one of those habits that we'll have to kind of break and build upon. There are good ways to smudge. There are also a lot of bad ways to smudge. So maybe you did this in high school. Maybe you watched some YouTube videos and some people told you how to smudge. We're not going to be doing it in this class. So smudging very often looks amateurish. It makes our drawings harder to erase and modify. Often when you're smudging, especially with your fingers, you're going to be putting oils into the paper that over time are going to yellow. They're going to smear. They're not going to be able to erase too easily. So we need to be building hand motor skills at actually achieving the values we want and be able to do controlled shading. So in this class, we're not going to be smudging. We're going to actually be building up skills at shading. There are many artists that do smudge. There are special smudging tools and techniques. But for right now, it's important that you build the skills at shading before you go into doing a charcoal drawing where you're using blending sticks and chamois and smudging things out. I mean, there's some artists that made a whole career out of smearing and smudging charcoal and drawing materials on paper. But for this class, we're going to be doing controlled shading. So we're going to be building those motor skills at accurately depicting the values we want. So here's an example of controlled shading with Catherine Polk, and we can see there's all these very kind of light gradations and subtle changes within value that are slowly built up over time. I'm always amazed by the artist David Morrison, who does these photorealistic looking drawings. You can see him over there drawing a bird's nest. And it's kind of hard to tell what is the drawing, what is the photograph, what is the real bird's nest, because, you know, he really spends the time slowly building up those values and making it look very, very accurate to the subject that he's drawing. So we're going to be building skills at controlled shading. So in addition to working with controlled shading, we're going to be using techniques that are both additive and subtractive when dealing with value. So we'll have exercises dealing with both those. Additive drawing, I think we all know, is when we're adding material to the paper. So we're working with micron pen, charcoal, graphite, and we're shading onto the paper. I always like the work of Robin O'Neill, who works predominantly completely additively. Her work is done with graphite pencils. They're usually pretty large scale drawings. So this drawing up top here at the buffalo might be, 9 feet tall and, 50 inches or so more wide. I mean, these are huge drawings. They're bigger than me, and they're populated with these tiny kind of middle-aged white dudes in black track suits. They're pretty weird. This is one of her kind of famous drawings. You can see that there's 3 big panels. They're quite huge. This tower right here is made up of a lot of those different guys in tracksuits. There's thousands and thousands of them. Really small. You can see she's working on it right here. It's all done additively. This drawing took her 3 years to do, and it was just slowly drawing out thousands and thousands of these little characters. Okay, so here's some student examples of working additively with charcoal. So we're setting up a still life, and we're kind of shading things out. Thinking about how we're going to capture those 6 different categories of light, how they're going to cast around a form. Think about how we're using value scales in order to do those drawings. So we're going to be working on our white paper. When we're doing additive, we're going to start off with the gesture drawing. We're going to build up our values. We might use softer pencils to get our darker values. And then we're going to refine and add details on top of that. And there's a demo that's going to cover all that kind of stuff that you definitely need to go check out. Next up, we have subtractive. So we're going to be removing material from the paper. So we're going to work with our white vinyl eraser, maybe with our kneaded erasers, and we'll be removing information from the paper. So we're going to have some drawings where we start off with a completely black sheet of paper, and then we only use an eraser to pull out highlights. And Carol Wax is a good example of working subtractively. She works in a printing process, but there's still very much drawings. But she goes and makes her etching plate completely black, and then she goes and scrapes away all the details and pulls out all those highlights. So starting from black and then removing all the details that she wants to be white, and then she has her image. So we'll be working in that kind of mode of production where we're erasing, not shading, but just erasing our values. So here's some student examples of our subtractive drawings, done mostly in charcoal. So here's a still life. You can see the artist is trying to get those folds, trying to think about how there are reflections, how there are cast shadows. This was done in our class last fall. We had a party. We carved some pumpkins, and we did drawings of our pumpkins in class. So all done subtractively. So when we're doing subtractive, we're going to take our white piece of paper. We're going to make a 1-inch border around the outside. We're going to fill that paper in completely black. We're going to be using graphite. And then we're going to use our eraser to pull out details, to pull out highlights. So it's going to get us thinking about value in different ways, thinking more consciously about the highlights and less about the shadows. Okay, so that was a big talk on value. Definitely go check out the rest of the module, and I will see you all very soon. Stay safe.